Israel's forces say they are targeting Hamas militants at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital as medical staff warn premature babies and patients are dying inside.
Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping arrive in San Francisco for a much-anticipated face-to-face meeting on the sidelines of the APEC summit.
The EU is failing to meet the production capacities needed to provide Ukraine with enough ammunition in its war against Russia.
The walls of a cellar covered with sketches by Renaissance master Michelangelo opens to the public in Florence. Israeli forces have stormed Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. After a lengthy standoff Wednesday night, the Israeli Defense Force said it carried out a, quote, precise and targeted operation against Hamas militants, despite the hospital being full of hundreds of displaced people, patients and medical staff. Hours earlier, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said the White House has evidence that Hamas is using Al-Shifa as a command centre.
I can confirm for you that we have information that Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad use some hospitals in the Gaza Strip, including Al-Shifa, and tunnels underneath them to conceal and to support their military operations and to hold hostages.
During the day, the Hamas-run health ministry had called for a ceasefire to evacuate 36 premature babies who are battling for their lives without functioning incubators. After days of airstrikes around the hospital, its power has been cut and images of vulnerable babies raised international concern. The situation in Gaza's other hospitals is also dire, with the United Nations saying 22 of 36 are not functional due to lack of generator fuel, damage and combat. The 14 hospitals still open have barely enough supplies to sustain critical and life-saving surgeries.
هاي المناطق اللي بيقولوا عنها آمنة يعني دير البلح الآمن وين فيش منطقة في قطاع غزة آمن لا في سوق ولا في منتزه ولا في مدرسة ولا مستشفى كله مستهدف.
Hamas continues to deny Israel's claims that it is using hospitals, in particular Al-Shifa, to conceal or support their military operations and to hold hostages. Thousands of protesters rallying in support of Israel in Washington, D.C., countering recent pro-Palestinian protests in a divided U.S. Many of these demonstrators were wearing Israel's colours and called for the release of hostages held by the Hamas militant group. This event Tuesday was also held to combat anti-Semitism, with Congress members addressing the gathering. It comes in the wake of several nationwide protests calling for a ceasefire and criticising Israel's military actions. Tight security measures reflected heightening tensions across the country.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has arrived in San Francisco for a much-anticipated China-US summit meeting with his counterpart, Joe Biden. It's his first trip to the U.S. in 6 years and is coupled with the 30th APEC economic leaders meeting this week. Experts have high hopes for the talks, believing they will help stabilize China-U.S. relations and inject new momentum into global economic recovery. President Joe Biden says he expects the talks to be wide-ranging and to include the Israel-Hamas war, Taiwan, the war in Ukraine, and election interference. While at the same time, he's hoping to improve relations between the two countries, which deteriorated earlier this year.
To get back on a normal course of corresponding, being able to pick up a phone and talk to one another if there's a crisis, being able to make sure our military still have contact with one another. We can't take, as I told you, we're not trying to decouple from China. But what we're trying to do is change the relationship for the better.
The Biden-Xi meeting will take place during the Asia-Pacific Economics Cooperation Summit, which is a unique grouping of economies rather than nations, allowing participation of Chinese-ruled Hong Kong and democratically governed Taiwan. Spain's parliament is set to re-elect Pedro Sanchez as prime minister after a contentious deal that granted amnesty to Catalan separatists in return for support of a new government. The legislation has already been registered in Congress and will cover all crimes related to the Catalan separatist movement from 2012 onwards. Its text is also being studied to prevent the creation of legal loopholes, and it has been sent to Brussels for examination.
Yo creo que aquí hay una cuestión que, desde una perspectiva jurídica, quizá hay que tener en cuenta, que es la posibilidad de que los jueces españoles planteen la famosa cuestión prejudicial ante el Tribunal de Justicia de la Unión Europea. La cuestión prejudicial sí paraliza también la aplicación de la ley hasta que el Tribunal de Justicia se pronuncie sobre esa cuestión prejudicial.
Sanchez's Socialist Party hopes that people prosecuted during the independence movement will be able to return to Spain within the next 6 months. But the legislation has also sparked outrage, as hundreds of thousands have already protested against it, and officials had to block off access on Wednesday to Spain's Congress, ahead of Sanchez's inauguration, to prevent protesters from surrounding it.
En la retina quedan el asalto al Capitolio de Estados Unidos o la invasión de las instituciones de Brasil por parte de los seguidores de Jair Bolsonaro. Aquí 1 millar de policías velarán porque los procesos democráticos en España transcurran con normalidad. En Madrid, Jaime Velázquez, Euronews.
The EU promised to provide 1 million rounds of ammunition to Kiev by next March, but so far only 30% of this target has been met. At a meeting of the bloc's defence ministers Tuesday in Brussels, concerns were raised that the EU will be unable to keep its promise.
Die Frage, ob 1 Million jemals realistisch war, es wäre eigentlich die richtige. Es hat Stimmen gegeben, die gesagt haben, Vorsicht, 1 Million ist leicht zu beschließen, das Geld ist da, aber die Produktion muss da sein. Die mahnenden Stimmen haben jetzt leider recht. Wir haben mit unseren Rahmenverträgen einen großen Teil beigetragen und werden das auch weiter tun. Wir sind in Gesprächen mit der Rüstungsindustrie. Die Produktion muss hochgefahren und beschleunigt werden. Das ist das Gebot der Stunde.
Das heißt, Sie gehen davon aus, dass das Ziel nicht erreicht wird?
Die 1 Million werden nicht erreicht. Davon muss man ausgehen.
So why is the EU unlikely to be able to deliver on its promise? One reason is that Europe has given as much as it can from its own stocks and now needs to produce more. According to some experts, taking into account that Ukraine's artillery uses around 45,000 shells per week, within 2 months the entire annual production of the European Union could be consumed. Funding is also a problem when it comes to increasing production.
Ένα από τα προβλήματα αυτά αφορά την αμυντική βιομηχανία, η οποία χρειάζεται να έχει μία διαβεβαίωση από τα κράτη ότι δεν θα επενδύσει άδικα, δεν θα επενδύσει πόρους για καινούργιες γραμμές παραγωγής και μετά από 2 χρόνια θα έρθουν τα κράτη-μέλη, οι κυβερνήσεις και θα τους πούνε δεν χρειαζόμαστε άλλα πυρομαχικά. Μπορεί οι μεγάλες βιομηχανίες να μπορούν να αντλήσουν χρηματοδότηση από τις διεθνείς αγορές ή να έχουν δικούς πόρους για να επενδύσουν, αλλά οι μικρότερες θα πρέπει να απευθυνθούν στα ευρωπαϊκά τραπεζικά ιδρύματα. Όμως, οι ευρωπαϊκές τράπεζες δεν δανείζουν στις αμυντικές βιομηχανίες ως αποτέλεσμα του συστήματος taxonomy και του ότι έχουν χαρακτηριστεί ως non-sustainable οι αμυντικές βιομηχανίες.
There's also other problems, like the lack of skilled labour and suitable machinery. But Thierry Breton, the commissioner responsible for production capacity, is optimistic. He says that everything is now in the hands of EU countries.
L'objectif de produire plus d'1 million de munitions sur une base annuelle que nous avions pris et qu'il soit atteint à partir du printemps sera tenu. Maintenant, c'est aux États membres de passer les commandes.
The White House said on Friday that North Korea has delivered more than 1,000 containers of military equipment and munitions to Russia, meaning Europe and its allies must soon step up.
A small 30-metre square space and some €500 charcoal sketches. But these aren't any old drawings. This was the Italian master painter Michelangelo's secret room. For centuries, this formerly dark and dingy coal cellar was used as a storage room within the San Lorenzo Basilica in Florence. Then in 1975, these drawings were accidentally discovered during a cleaning operation beneath 2 layers of plaster. Michelangelo also hid in this room for about 2 months in 1530, when he was hunted by Pope Clement VII, a member of the powerful Medici family, for supporting the Republican government.
È un impatto forte perché sicuramente è un ambiente che ti cattura proprio da tutte le parti, ti trascina in una specie di capsula del tempo dove si vede come facevano loro a inventarsi un'opera d'arte. Mi sembra bellissimo.
Rinchiuso in questa piccola stanza, Michelangelo trovò il modo di non annoiarsi e di portarsi anche avanti con il lavoro, utilizzando per i suoi disegni l'unica superficie disponibile, le pareti del suo nascondiglio.
Experts say some of these sketches might belong to Michelangelo's apprentices due to differences in style, but the hand of the Renaissance genius is unmistakable in some others.
Questi sono disegni che sono proprio esercizi della mente, del progetto mentale dell'artista che lo traduce in disegno. Ce ne sono alcuni che hanno proprio una manualità e un'energia nel segno che li rendono qualitativamente superiori agli altri.
The studies of the human body and faces, the black marks of the torches that were used to light up the room, and the complicated composition of bodies on the walls all tell a story of an artist on a mission, even when a warrant was issued for his death.
Sono stati messi in relazione in genere con le pitture della Sistina, in qualche modo ricordano anche un po' la creazione con Dio Padre che proprio vola nell'aria e quindi, anche se non identico, però insomma ricorda molto.
Michelangelo's secret room is open to the public from the 15th of November to just 100 visitors per week.